Hello again, everybody. I'm here to talk about something a little more high level, again, the interaction of companies with their stakeholders. I'd like to start with definitions of stakeholders. This is from Wikipedia, which I like because, of course, it's a collaborative work by the stakeholders of Wikipedia. Stakeholder is a person, group, organization, member, or system who can affect or can be affected by an organization's actions. So how many people here today are stakeholders? I would have thought everybody's hand would go up because you're stakeholders in society, in your national governments, we're stakeholders in Europe, or even stakeholders in this event here today. So there's lots of different layers and levels of being a stakeholder and, of course, of stakeholder engagement, but this is just about stakeholders and companies. There are many different ways in which a company can engage with its stakeholders, and I'll come to show you a few. They can look at who the stakeholders are, they can map them in different ways, different groups of stakeholders, local communities perhaps, and regulators and NGOs, customers and employees, of course. They can look at materiality matrices, i.e. they can ask their stakeholders which are the most important environmental and social issues, and they can do maps around that to help them develop their own CSR strategies. Lots of companies publish their stakeholder engagement in CSR reports. Some companies publish the results but not the methodologies, and the reason for that, I think the reason for that is that many times the people who help them produce the reports, they have their own methodologies. If a company doesn't have a team, it goes to a CSR consultancy or a communications agency. That other company might have its own methodology, which it doesn't want published everywhere, because it's competitive. So, of course, the company doesn't publish that. I've come across that a few times. So I'd like to show you just quickly just a handful of examples from the world's leading reports. These are all the examples I'll show you are from the winners of this year's CR Reporting Awards. It's a global CR Reporting Awards. These are all reports that came out last year, 2012, and these are screenshots from the winning entries. But Nike, of course, did a section on stakeholder review panel, which is a panel of its stakeholders who help them put the report together and help develop company strategy. That is published in the report. Here's one from the Cooperative Group. You may not know that. It's a mutual, i.e. it's a very special kind of company. In the UK, mainly in food retail, and they map their stakeholders, they engage their stakeholders in almost everything they do, all their major decisions. It's a large group. It includes a bank, an insurance company, and they also ask their stakeholders which organizations they should invest in. Just for example, Pacific Hydro is a large Australian electricity company, and here they are in the report. I know it's very small, you can't read it, but it doesn't matter. You can see it's a listing of different stakeholder audiences and how it engages with each of those individual stakeholder audiences. And here's a company from South Korea, Samsung Engineering. They did a stakeholder engagement survey, again through an agency, but this is publishing the results. And then another one, also from the Samsung sustainability report, who they think their major stakeholder audiences are, and how they engage with them. So you see, this is building up a picture of lots of different companies from different parts of the world and from different sectors, all showing their activities. And here finally, Hydro-Quebec, a Canadian electricity company. This is the matrix of all the different impacts they think they have on the company, which they put together with their stakeholders by doing a stakeholder review, a stakeholder survey, which are the priority social, environmental, and governance issues that their company, and then publishing it. So that's a lot of different areas. So I wanted to think about, how do you find a pattern? How can I explain this is what's happening, these are the dynamics? So although these are all the winners, I looked at a much wider selection of these. About 25 different leading reports from our reporting awards last month. And I didn't see a lot of difference. I couldn't see different patterns across different sectors, different countries, apart from companies that have community issues, such as mining companies and oil and gas companies and construction, perhaps building roads, that have direct issues with local communities. Then they have to invest in stakeholder dialogue, and we've heard some of that this morning from Denkstadt, Bulgaria, stakeholder engagement from a mining company in a local community. That is the most focused example of stakeholder engagement. But even companies that have no direct impacts, like insurance companies and banks, also report on stakeholder engagement in these reports. So that's not very helpful to you, because everybody wants to see a pattern. So let's look at the dynamics. Why would a company publish something about stakeholder engagement? Is it just because they have a committed manager, perhaps a CSR manager, who says this is something we should do? Or is it as an outside pressure from stakeholders saying, you need to engage with us, you need to publish your interaction with us? Well, yes, both those questions, yes, companies do that. We find many examples, and I'm sure we know ourselves examples of that happening. But my argument here with you this afternoon, and I'm sorry it's all words and slides, I don't have any nice music videos to keep you awake, but I'll try and be brief, is that it's part of how a well-managed company operates. And I'll try to prove that. A company doesn't make corporate responsibility decisions on its own. It doesn't just decide in the board level or even among its employees what it should do, how it should act on corporate responsibility and vis-a-vis the environment and society. It has to have management frameworks, and in corporate responsibility there are 3 global frameworks. They're the Global Reporting Initiative, I expect you all know. There's A1000, and we have an A1000 expert here with us, John Aston, and there's ISO 26000. The GRI G3 are the current global framework for producing corporate responsibility sustainability reports. And they have a section 4, which is what they say is core. It means every company should report on it. So you don't need to read it, but it's there. Every company using the GRI framework should be reporting on stakeholder engagement. And here you can see from Corporate Register Database, these are all the reports from 2001, 2012, and the blue is the percentage of companies using the GRI framework. So around 40% now of 7,000 companies report every year. 40% of those, that's around just over 2,500, use the GRI. They should all be reporting on stakeholder engagement. In A1000, the A1000 family of standards, it's a series of different standards, involves stakeholders in the generation of strategies, policies, and programs. So stakeholder engagement is key to this. Probably the A1000 is the most important single standard in corporate responsibility. The GRI isn't a standard, it's a framework, but the A1000 is a standard. And here you can see this is from A1000 that was introduced in 2008. So reports started to be produced in 2009 using this assurance standard, but it's A1000 AS, it's part of the family. I'm sorry, it's complicated. And until last month, that's the number you can see by sector. So we had 60 reports by banks, about 53 from telecommunication services, and so on all the way through. Those are the top 10 sectors. So you can see across top 10 sectors, all those reports engaged with their stakeholders and reported on it. There's also a stakeholder engagement standard, but I don't want to try your patience by explaining that. But all I can say is John Aston is probably the world expert on A1000 SES. So ISO 26000 launched 2.5 years ago. It's guidance, and it sets identification of and engagement with stakeholders as a core part of social responsibility. Now, nobody collects statistics on companies using ISO 26000 yet, but we will do at corporate register by the end of this year. And we also need to do the AA1000 SES because nobody collects statistics on that. My final argument on this is to say that stakeholder engagement isn't just something companies should report about. It's part of how they report. Every bit of communication is about a message and an audience. What am I going to say? Who am I saying it to? So when a company decides to produce a CSR report, it needs to say, who are the stakeholders? Usually it has so many, it can't report on all of them. You might have 20 or 30 different groups of stakeholders, but usually it brings it down to 5 or 10 made audiences. So it identifies the audience and it prioritizes which are the most important ones. Then typically it does a survey. It asks them somehow, either by telephone or via an agency or on the web, what they want to see in the report. Then it prioritizes the issues in the report. Otherwise, every report would be 500 pages and nobody would read them. And then after the report has been published, it goes back to those stakeholders and said, how do we do? Asks how do we do, what do we do next time? How do we make this better? So my argument here is that stakeholder engagement isn't just something companies report about, it's how they report. It's an integral part of the process. So I'm nearly finished now. I'm sure you'll be pleased to know. My conclusions on this, it's a major part of corporate responsibility reports, and we've seen that. It's a core part of the GRI framework, so every company using the GRI should be reporting on this. If a company doesn't report on stakeholder engagement, it probably means this isn't a proper CSR report. It's just public relations. It isn't an optional add-on that you can choose, are we going to report on stakeholder engagement or not? It's key to it. And when I showed you the 5 or 6 examples at the beginning, there's lots of different things going on. Some companies report on identification, some look at engagement and programs. So I'll show you an overview of that research. Those are all the companies, the winners of this year's CR Reporting Awards. These are the world's best reports. The top one there is if they use the GRI G3 indicators completely. All of them do. And then stakeholder engagement, yes, everybody. Do they do stakeholder surveys? Yes, everybody. And then it gets a little patchier. You can So there's no rules and no patterns here, but there's lots of things they can report on: partnerships, community events, workshops, site visits for local communities perhaps, review panels, lots of things going on. So it's a very dynamic area, and I hope that if you report yourself, that you report on this fully in your reports, and if you're a company stakeholder, that you give the feedback that company needs to say, this is what we want to read in your report. I say thank you very much.